Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvaitam Savadhutam Varijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Magyanath Mirandasya Gyanangana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Siddhantotpalasara Nityarasikam Ham Sammilasatmakam Maudaryakya Sudhama Sevakanadam Vishrama Bhakti Pradam Yachna Yukti Vichakshanam Dvagavido Vaishishta Shaktya Sada Vandeham Tripurarinamakayatim Shri Bhakti Vedantinam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha Namo Mahavranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishari Rishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Nama Eva Kevalam Kalo Nasti Eva Nasti Eva Nasti Eva Gatiranyatha. So welcome back everyone. I'm happy to see you, Kali Yuga Pavana Prabhu. Thank you again for translating. Bindumati Sakhidasi, Dandavat, Martin, Namarasana, Pavana Prabhu, Sakyarati, and Shamananda. Dandavats to all of you. We're back to Patanjali's Yoga Sutra for devotees. Today is the third out of 4 parts. And today I will speak more about the second chapter of this book. The previous lectures have been in introduction to the Yoga Sutra, something about Patanjali, something about the idea of the book and the form of the book, and then something about the different topics of the first chapter, how Patanjali defined yoga, what the goal of yoga is, and so on. And we saw, of course, that for Patanjali, yoga doesn't mean exactly the same as what the word usually means today. Today, yoga means a kind of gymnastics in general terms. For Patanjali, yoga is a kind of very focused meditation where the movements of the mind have been stilled by focusing them on one single object, such as the syllable Om, which Patanjali identified with Ishvara or God. Or then the movements of the mind have been stilled in such a way that the mind is completely empty. And then Patanjali thinks the Purusha or the Drashtar, the true self, can come forth. Now, all of these things might sound good, but Patanjali's commentators and people started writing commentaries on Patanjali's sutras quite early. They have been puzzled by how Patanjali presents kind of a path for advancing in yoga in the first chapter. But then when he begins the second chapter, he kind of starts from the beginning. And the way in which most commentators have resolved this is by declaring that Patanjali is speaking to different types of practitioners in different parts of the book. This, of course, is something that Indian authors often do. They can use different kind of terms, maybe Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama, or something like this. But dividing practitioners into different groups like this is done in many different traditions. It's not primarily done to give different values or judgments for people. That Bindumati is an Uttama, so she's better than Bhrigu, who is a Kanishta, and so on. That's usually not the point. Usually the point is that different people are on different levels of the practice, and that means that they need different types of practices. So Bindumati needs one type of practice, Bhrigupada needs another type of practice. That's usually the point of dividing practitioners into different groups or levels, or whatever term you want to use. And that's also how Patanjali's commentators have understood Patanjali. In the beginning of the second chapter, he introduces a new term, which is Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga means the yoga of action. And he says that by engaging in the yoga of action, one can attain a Samadhi, which for Patanjali is the same as yoga, this kind of deep concentration. And one can also get rid of the kleshas, or the hindrances, or things that are causing different types of klishta or pain on the path. Now, this Kriya Yoga comprises 3 different practices. And this is an important point. In Patanjali's worldview, and this is something that agrees with the Mahabharata and agrees with Vedanta philosophers as well, all action happens on 3 levels. Let's say that I would give Martin a massage. So that would be something hopefully nice. I'm not sure about it, but hopefully nice that I did to him on the physical level. So that's one level, the physical level, the level of the body, the level of physical action. Similarly, I could do something bad to him on the physical level. That's one level, the physical level. The next level is the level of words, or the vachika level. So I could do something nice for Martin verbally as well. I could say something about how handsome he is and what a nice devotee he is, what different nice things that he's doing. I could also do the opposite, of course. In English, there's a saying that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words can never hurt you. And we all know that that's a total lie. That's not true at all. If I would hit Shamananda with a stick, that would hurt for a little while. But if I would say something really nasty to him, that could hurt for a long time. And we all have experience of that. Some teacher told us something when we were in school, like 100 years ago, and we still remember that. So physical activity, verbal activity, those are 2 different planes of karma, planes of action. Then the third plane of action is mental action. So I could do something nice for Martin physically, verbally, also mentally. Patanjali thinks that thoughts have effects. Obviously, in the way that if you think about something for a long time, you're going to start speaking about it and you're going to start acting on that. If I would think really bad thoughts about Namarasana, for example, at some point, I'm sure I would tell my wife that something blah, 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 blah. And then maybe at some point I would also act on it. But even if I never told anybody how I really hate Namarasana, I would always pretend I like, and whenever we would meet, I'd be, oh, Rasana, nice to see you, Haribol, Haribol. But deep down, I would harbor these really bad thoughts about her. What would be the problem with that? If I would never let that affect my talk or my action, what would be the problem? And if I was such a psychopath and sociopath that she wouldn't even know that I'm thinking badly about her, what would be the problem? Well, the problem, in the least, would be that I would be hurting myself. The more I'm thinking bad about other people, the less I would be thinking good about them. The world of the mind is a huge place. It's spacious and big. It's much bigger than we think. Like, for example, Gornarayan. He's a strong man. So if I would ask Gornarayan and he would be here next to me, unfortunately he isn't, but if he would be here next to me and I would ask Gornarayan that, Gor, come and lift me up in the air, it wouldn't be a big problem for Gornarayan. He's a strong young man. But if I would say, Gor, take me and all of the people here on this Zoom call and make us all into a kind of a human jigsaw puzzle and lift us up in the air like this and throw us out on the street outside here. That would be a bigger challenge for Gornarayan Prabhu. But you did it already, didn't you? In the mind. So the mind is very spacious. It's huge. It has so many possibilities that the physical world doesn't offer us. But it's not unlimited. It's not unlimited. If you fill your mind with negative thoughts about others, you're probably also going to start to think negative thoughts about yourself. And you will not have that much space for positive thoughts. So all action is carried out on these three levels: the physical level, the verbal level, and the mental level. And Patanjali offers three different practices in this Kriya Yoga that work on these three levels. The first is tapas, or austerity. That's on the physical level, tapas. We know the word tapas, of course, from our bhakti tradition as well. Rupa Goswami doesn't much recommend tapas. He says that too much tapas, too much tapasya, will make the heart hard and dry. And if you ever engaged in tapasya, and I don't mean the kind of tapasya where you're like, okay, should I take 3 sweet balls or 2? Okay, I'm going to be a real tapasvi and just have 2. But like proper tapasya, like brahmacharya or fasting for a long time or something like that. If you've done anything like this, you probably know that it can be good in many different ways, but it can also make you really proud. That's at least the experience I had when I was a brahmachari. I became really, really proud and nasty. I wasn't a nice person at all. So Rupa Goswami is not very fond of tapasya for this reason. Doesn't fit very well with bhakti. In bhakti, we're trying to make the heart softer. But in Patanjali's practice, tapasya is something that he's recommending for purifying the physical body. Tapasya can mean many different things, of course. It can mean staying awake, it can mean fasting, it can mean celibacy, it can mean taking cold baths in the winter time. It can be all kinds of things. But what is kind of definition of tapasya is that it's something that you do voluntarily for some particular purpose. So it needs to be voluntary. It's not tapasya if somebody's forcing you to do it. Then it's just you being forced. Or if you're too poor to have warm water in the morning, that's not tapasya, that's just being poor. It needs to be something that is conscious. So that's the first thing, tapasya. And the meaning of tapas, as many of you I'm sure know, it means heat. So it refers to a practice that will generate inner heat. It will generate inner power. And the idea, of course, is that this power can then be utilized on the yogic path. So tapas, that's the first. The second is svadhyaya. Svadhyaya means reading. But reading not exactly as we understand reading today. If I would read a book, for example, I'm taking a book here from my desk. I'd be reading it like, let's see if I can show, like this. That's how a modern person reads. We don't make a sound. If somebody reads by moving their lips or whispering, we will think that that's a really simple person who just learned how to read or something. But in ancient times, everybody read aloud. Even 300 years ago, everybody read aloud. That was the meaning of reading. Reading is sitting or standing. Denna svenska kyrka i Amerika utgör numera det största samfundet av svenskar, bla 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 bla. So you'd read aloud. And the point of that, of course, was that usually you read together with some other people, and others could also hear then the reading. We don't read like that nowadays because it's so much slower. And usually we read just for ourselves. So it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of energy to read aloud. So we read silently and we can read much quicker. But when we want to do some sacred reading, when we want to do spiritual reading, it's actually a good idea to read aloud, even if we're sitting alone. Even if we're sitting alone in our room, when we're reading something, like for example, I have Satyaraja's 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan here on my desk. Another famous pastime at Radhakund involves Das Goswami's concern for the sanctity of the lake itself. Disturbed that devotees had to wash their clothes and pots in her holy waters, Raghunath Das decided to dig a well for these purposes, and so on. When I read like that, I need to read much more slowly, which gives my mind also a little bit better chance to actually catch what I'm reading. If you're a person who likes to read and reads a lot, then probably you're the same as me in the way that you'll sometimes read many pages and realize, I actually don't remember at all what was said on those pages. I just skim them through thinking that I want to advance in this book quickly, but I didn't catch the meaning at all. So svadhyaya means reading, but it means reading aloud so that you can really grasp what you're reading. And reading aloud also refers to reciting things. So a yogic practice is to recite texts. Like many devotees I know, for example, they read a chapter of the Bhagavad Gita every day aloud in Sanskrit or their own language, just to kind of get the feel for the text. And of course, there's also the idea that many of these sacred texts, they are written in a form that is on a vibrational level affecting us. So that if we read, for example, the Sanskrit language, it does something by itself, even if we wouldn't know the meaning. And this is, of course, particularly true when it comes to mantras. Manam trayate iti mantraha. That's the definition of the mantra. The word that liberates the mind. So svadhyaya can refer to both reading sacred texts, such as Bhagavad Gita or other texts on yoga from Patanjali's perspective. Or then it can refer to reciting mantras. In either case, it's a verbal activity. Tapas, physical, svadhyaya, verbal. And then the mental activity that Patanjali thirdly gives is Ishvara Pranidhana. So he comes back here to devotion or surrender to Ishvara. For Patanjali, that's something that is primarily a mental activity. It can involve verbal activities such as reciting Om. It can involve all kind of physical activities as well. But primarily it's something that you do with the mind or with the heart. So I spent some time describing this Kriya Yoga just to show you that from Patanjali's perspective, the yoga path is something that is supposed to take in account these three levels of the human being: the physical level, the verbal level, and the mental level. So he then goes on to speak about these kleshas that you're supposed to be able to counteract by engaging in this Kriya Yoga. He then says something about the kind of metaphysics of his worldview. For him, everything is made up of two principles, Prakriti and Purusa. In Vedanta, of course, there's the idea that everything comes from Brahman, whether you understand Brahman as a personal being or impersonal being. In Vedanta, everything is ultimately one. That's usually how it's understood. One with qualities or one and different or something like that. But there's the one in the beginning. Eko Bahu Syam, like said in the Upanishads, the one wanted to become many. According to Patanjali, there's two. There's Prakriti and Purusha. Prakriti is matter. Purusha is spirit. Matter and Purusha, Prakriti and Purusha, when they get together, then Prakriti starts developing and going through all different kinds of motions and cycles and changes. Just like summer turns to fall and fall into winter and winter into spring and again into summer. Just like a young man grows up into a middle-aged man, an old man dies and is reborn. In the same way, the whole world goes through these eternal cycles. And as long as the Purusha identifies itself with Prakriti, for such a long time, it will remain within this world. Now, Patanjali has in this way introduced two different paths to this goal of Kaivalya or liberation. The word that Patanjali uses for liberation is not moksha, which is more accustomed to us Vedantists. He uses a word from Samkhya philosophy, and that is Kaivalya. The other philosophy that Patanjali is the closest to of these five other schools of ancient Indian philosophy is indeed Samkhya. And sometimes Samkhya and yoga as a philosophy, are grouped together. In Samkhya and in yoga, ultimate liberation is called Kaivalya. Kaivalya means aloneness or isolation. And it doesn't sound that nice. Sakyarati, what do you think about eternal aloneness? Eternal isolation? Maybe not the...
Very sad.
Very sad. Yes. But what Patanjali means by this term is not that you're kind of locked up in isolation or something like that, but that the Purusha is isolated from Prakriti, completely divorced from matter. And what that then actually means when Purusha and Prakriti are not bound up like this, but Purusha and Prakriti go different ways. About that he says nothing. Patanjali thinks words cannot go that far. We disagree, of course. I'm sure you've heard Guru Maharaj speak about Ikshater na Shabdat in the Brahma Sutras, and how Baladevi Bhushan understands that to mean Not that you cannot say anything about that liberation, but that words cannot fully express the meaning of it. It's not beyond words, but it's something that words cannot say enough about. But Patanjali, he takes it in the other way. He thinks about whatever happens after liberation, you cannot say anything. So he focuses his description on the path towards this kaivalya, or this isolation of Prakriti from Purusha. Patanjali also thinks that there are many Purushas. He's a pluralist in this way. He poses the question, what happens to Prakriti if the Purusha is liberated? Let's say Shamananda, he engages really, really seriously in practice, and then he's liberated. So does then Prakriti, does then matter stop existing? No, of course not, Patanjali answers, because there's so many other Purushas still caught up in Prakriti. So, like a Vaishnava philosopher, Patanjali holds that there's a plurality of individual beings. I will never become Pavana Prabhu, I will never become Gaur Narayan Prabhu, I will never become Saragrahi. We're all different from each other, according to Patanjali's philosophy. So again, this is one place where we can find some commonality. Now, after having dealt with these things, Patanjali then launches into, towards the middle of the second chapter, into the most famous part of the Yoga Sutra. And that is the part that deals with Ashtanga Yoga. Prabhupada called Ashtanga Yoga mystic yoga. And in today's world, Ashtanga Yoga in the yoga community is often held to refer to one particular style of yoga. It's a style of yoga where you have different series that you always follow. You use a particular kind of breathing, and so on and so forth. Prabhupada's term mystic yoga is closer to what Patanjali actually means by Ashtanga Yoga. But mystic yoga is, as a term, also such a mystical term, so it doesn't always tell us that much about what Ashtanga Yoga actually means. It's maybe better to go with a more literal translation. Ashtanga Yoga means the yoga of 8 parts, or 8 angas. This idea of a Eightfold Path, if you've studied world religions a little bit, you might recognize it from the teachings of the Buddha. And Patanjali, his Eightfold Path is not exactly the same as the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, but the idea is very similar. You start with some kind of ethical, moral background to your practice. Then you build up on that with physical practices. And then gradually you get into the more internal or mental practices. So Patanjali says that if you follow these 8 steps, you're going to clear yourself of impurities. You're going to awaken the light of knowledge. And this light of knowledge will culminate in what he calls viveka khyati, or discriminative discernment. Viveka khyati, discriminative discernment, means the ability to see things as they are. Many times Patanjali is depicted as carrying a sword in his hand. What does he do with this sword? He discriminates. He cuts away the truth from falsity. He cuts away evil from good. He shows us things as they are. This is an important point. In Patanjali's philosophy, Patanjali doesn't believe that everything is simply an illusion. Yes, it's true that we do not see things as they are right now, generally, because of our preconceived opinions, because of our conditioning. Uh, if I look at a book, a thick book, I don't even need to know what book it is. If I just look at the thick book, I think, oh, nice. Somebody else sees a thick book and they think, oh, how boring. Who could read such a boring book? Neither of us sees the book as it is. There's some kind of preconceived opinion that makes one of us think that nice and the other one think boring. Or if we see another person, we might not see that person for who she or he really is, but we might see that person just in terms of what that person can do for us. So yes, we do not always see the world clearly around us, but that's because we are not having this kind of discernment. We don't have this ability yet to see things clearly, but we can train it, Patanjali is saying. We can get it, we can learn it. So the way to get this kind of insight, this kind of clear vision, is by following the eightfold path of yoga. The first two of those build kind of the basis. They're called Yama and Niyama. Yama, that's the name, the same name as the god of death. It refers to rules. Yama is the god of rules, right and wrong. So Yama refers to 5 different things. Patanjali loves numbers, and out of all numbers, 5 is clearly his favorite number. There's so many 5s in the Yoga Sutra. Even this eightfold path, he divides into 2 parts. Not 4 and 4 as any normal person, but 5 and 3, because you need to have 5. So there are 5 yamas. The first of those is Ahimsa, non-violence. And this is a big deal for Patanjali. He begins with Ahimsa because for him it's the main of the yamas. After Ahimsa comes, for example, truthfulness. But the truthfulness that is hurting, that's not yogic truthfulness. There's a famous story in the Mahabharata about a guy who decides that he's going to become the best of all yogis. I think only guys can decide things like this. But anyway, he decides that he's going to become the perfect yogi. So he builds himself a small hut in the jungle, just according to all the rules and regulations. It's just exactly the right size, all the right materials. And he sits there in his perfect yoga hut and he engages in yoga. And once when he's sitting there on his veranda and meditating on Om, a woman comes running up to him. She's completely sweaty and her clothes are completely in a mess. And she says, "Oh, great yogi, please let me hide here in your hut. Something terrible has happened. I don't have time to explain." And this great yogi is thinking, "Oh no, a woman. This is exactly why I left this material world." There she's coming with some complaint. And what kind of a woman? She's quite well formed and everything is in the right place. But it is said in the Shastras that you have to be merciful to all the fallen conditioned souls. So he says, "Yes, okay, you can go and hide there under the bed." And she goes there under the bed. And then a whole bunch of men are coming running and they are having sticks and somebody's having a axe and somebody's having a pitchfork and they are shouting and screaming and they are really angry about the honor of the village and fallen woman. And you can imagine the whole story. So the leader of these men asks the great yogi, oh, great Mahatma, one terrible woman from our village has run away and people saw her running in this direction. Have you seen her? And this great yogi is thinking, wait a minute. Oh, yes, Satya, truthfulness. Yes, I have seen her. She's there under the bed. So they take her away and he doesn't hear anything more about this and he goes on with his perfect yoga life. And after he's died, after his death, he ends up in hell. And he's really upset about this. How is this possible? I lived a perfect yogi life and I ended up in hell. So he goes and complains. He lodges a complaint with Chitragupta, Yama's secretary. And Chitragupta takes him for an interview and he explains everything, that I'm sure there's been a mix-up, maybe somebody else with my name, maybe they died at the same time or something, but I wasn't supposed to come here. I was a great yogi. Okay, so he looks him up in he has this huge book, of course. So he looks him up and he finds his name and reads and, oh yes. Do you remember that one woman who once came running to your ashram? Yes, I remember her quite well. She was, after all, quite memorable. And yes, that woman. But wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong. I did everything correctly. I let her hide, and then when they tested me, and they really tested me, I stuck to the truth. Truth will prevail. Yes, that truth is what brought you to hell. So such a truth, a truth that leads to violence, that leads to hurt, that's not a yogic truth. So Patanjali begins with ahimsa, non-violence, to emphasize its importance. Ahimsa, then satya, truthfulness, then asteya, not stealing, then brahmacharya, celibacy, and last, and by far most difficult, is aparigraha, or not owning things, not collecting things. Books, of course, don't count as things, but everything else you can't collect. No, that's not true. But it just goes to give you an example of how difficult these seemingly simple things are. So all of these 5 things, they're not meant to be a checklist of who is a real yogi, that you go into a yoga class and then you ask everybody, is there anybody here who is not vegetarian? Is there anybody here who lied in the last year? Is there anybody here who looked in the wrong way at a person of the opposite sex for the last 10 years? Okay, you all go out. That's not the point. The point is that these practices are all practices. We're all truthful, more or less, but maybe not in every situation. So we can practice truthfulness. We can become better at truthfulness. We can become better at non-violence. We can become better at all of these 5 different practices. Because again, as I said before, they function on 3 different levels. You can be violent in your actions, you can be violent in your words, you can be violent in your thoughts. So Patanjali is urging us to try to minimize violence on all of these levels. Then niyama, that's the next part. That refers to things that we're supposed to do. Yamas are things we're supposed to avoid. Niyamas are things we're supposed to do. We're supposed to cultivate shaucha, cleanliness, santosha, contentness, svadhyaya, sacred reading, tapas, austerity, svadhyaya, sacred reading, and ishvara pranidhana, or devotion or absorption in God. So these 3 last ones we already heard about in the context of Kriya Yoga. So again, you see, ishvara pranidhana comes up here a 3rd time. Bhakti is a very important part of Patanjali's path. Maybe not kind of the central piece like it is in Bhakti Yoga, but it's there nevertheless. So after Yama and Niyama, these kind of foundational ethical and moral rules, comes asana. Asana means posture. Patanjali defines asana as sthira sukha, firm and steady. So quite different from what asana practice mostly is today in today's yoga world. In today's yoga world, asana practice is mostly about movement, about moving, usually coordinating the movement with the breath, but moving from one position to another. For Patanjali, asana is primarily about sitting. And this is the kind of asana that we will recognize from the scriptures as well. This is the kind of thing that we hear about again and again in Mahabharata, for example. We hear about some sage who has been sitting for such a long time that plants have covered his body, or like when Hiranyakashipu was doing his tapasya, he was standing on his toes with his hands up in the air and his eyes focused on his thumbs for such a long time that ants made a anthill around his body. So this kind of determined sitting in one place, maybe not so long that ants build a hill around your body, but still not jumping around, not moving, sitting there. Guru Maharaj sometimes makes the joke that ordinary people will say that, don't just sit there, do something. But the yogi will say, don't just do something, sit there. So we need to kind of learn not to jump around and do all kind of things, but to focus, to turn our gaze inwards. That's the idea of asana. By sitting down, by focusing, by stopping the movements of the body, you're also stopping the movements of the mind. And then the dualities of hot, cold, happy, sad, all these things, they kind of fall away. And then the yogi next takes to pranayama, or control of the breath. There the idea is also to control the thoughts, to control the mind through the breath. That's something that people usually experience if they take a physical yoga class, that just like the mind is tied up with the body in so many different ways, the mind is also quite intimately tied up with the breath. Like if you become angry, for example, how that will affect the way you're breathing, or if you're upset, or if you're sad, or if you're excited or something like that, it's going to impact on your breathing all the time. Similarly, if you calm down the breathing, you can also calm the mind in the same way. And this is something we can do also when we do our own meditative practices, such as japa. We can use these kind of tools of yoga, learning how to sit in the proper way, how to breathe in the proper way. They can be useful also for our meditative practices. But in Patanjali's world, asana and pranayama, they both function as the first stepping stones for the internal practice. So after pranayama, the fourth practice, the fifth practice is pratyahara. Pratyahara means withdrawal. In the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna speaks about pratyahara, he gives the example of the tortoise pulling its limbs into its shell. The idea is that at this stage, the yogi takes his senses and kind of pulls them back. Like in our normal awareness, we're following our senses quite a lot. Let's say you're walking down the street and you pass a bakery and you feel this aroma of freshly baked pastries coming out the door. And then you walk in. Or you walk somewhere and you hear somebody gossiping something really juicy. Oh. And then you go there to hear more what's being told. So our senses are pulling our minds in different directions. In Pratyahara, the yogi turns this upside down. He makes the senses serve the mind instead of the mind serving the senses. So for example, a Pratyahara meditation on Krishna could be a meditation where the devotee tries to think about Krishna in a way where he or she can engage all the different senses. Meditating on the aroma of tulsi leaves offered at Krishna's lotus feet. The tulsi leaves dipped in fragrant sandalwood paste mixed with saffron. Meditating on the sound of Krishna's flute. Meditating on his hair, how that hair would feel. Meditating on what it would feel like to hold Krishna's hand. Meditating on obviously what Krishna looks like. So all different kind of sensations. Maybe on tasting the tambula chewed by the Lord. So all these different sensual activities that in ordinary cases pull us into worldly life can also be used to intensify our spiritual meditation. So then after Pratyahara comes withdrawal, comes these different stages of meditation. The first Patanjali calls dharana, or focusing. That would maybe be a good English translation, focusing. So in dharana, you're focusing the mind on the particular object you want to meditate on. Let's say you're focusing it on the Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna. I wonder what I should have for my evening snack. I need to remember to get some milk, by the way. I think we're completely out of milk. And I wonder if my daughter has done her homework. Oh, Krishna, Krishna, Hare, Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. And then again, the mind goes somewhere else. So dharana, that's when you're putting the mind there on the Mahamantra. So Patanjali's commentators, they compare this to drops of water falling from a broken faucet. Blup, Hare Krishna, blah, 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 blah. Krishna, Krishna, Hare, Hare. So these kind of drops of awareness. Then when you can keep the mind focused on the same object for some time, that's what Patanjali calls dhyana. That's the seventh practice, meditation proper. When the mind seemingly is in the same place, it looks like nothing is happening in the mind, but that's kind of an illusion. Actually, it's new thoughts all the time, but all the new thoughts, they follow each other, so they're one-pointed. That's how he defines dhyana. Tatra ekatanata dhyanam. One-pointedness, when all the thoughts, they follow each other. Thinking about Krishna, thinking about Krishna, thinking about Krishna, thinking about Krishna, like this after each other. And then the last stage, the ultimate stage of meditation, that's what Patanjali previously called yoga. Here he calls it Samadhi. It's the same thing. When the mind is so focused on the object that everything else falls away. So much so that you're not even aware of thinking about that object. There's a good example of a Mahabharata about this. when Drona was teaching the Pandavas archery. Many of you might have heard this story before. So Drona takes the 5 Pandavas out in the forest to practice their archery. And he tells them to look at a tree. Just look at that tree over there. You see that on that branch high up there, can you see it? There's a big pine cone. So I want you to try to hit that pine cone. So Bhima, try to hit it. First, take up your bow, and then try to aim at it. Can you see it? Yes, I see it, Guruji. So what do you see? Well, I see the tree, and I see the branch, and I see that target that you asked us to hit. Okay, shoot. Goes far off. Then Yudhishthira, you also try. Okay, I'm trying. So what do you see? Well, I see the branch, and I see the target. What else do you see? I don't see anything else. Okay, shoot. Still misses. Then Arjuna. Okay, Arjuna, aim. Yes, I'm aiming, Guruji. What do you see? I see the target. What else do you see? I don't see anything else. Shoot. He hits the target. So Samadhi is when the mind is so focused on the object that everything else falls away. You're not even aware of meditating on the target. Let's say you're meditating on the Mahamantra. You're not even aware that here Bhrigu is meditating on the Mahamantra. Only the Mahamantra is filling your mind. Patanjali calls that Samadhi. And next time we're going to hear, in the last part of this series, we're going to hear what Patanjali thinks can happen when you're able to focus the mind in this way. But I'm ending here for this time to see if there are any questions before we finish. Yes, Namarasana.
Can we say that we can recognize a good advanced devotee by good quality which who is presented, or it's not always goes together? So like good quality is advanced devotee, yeah? So it's like the rules or could be different when we can that some advanced devotee who did not present so nice good qualities. You understand my point or not?
Yes, I think I understand it. That you can judge whether a person is an advanced devotee by seeing his qualities. And Rupa Goswami would agree. He says that there are different qualities that you can recognize a bhava bhakta by. That person has taste for the holy name. He is uninterested in material things. That person doesn't want to waste even a moment outside of Krishna Bhakti, and so on. So he gives these kind of qualities, quite kind of concrete qualities that you can judge. He doesn't say that person knows really well Sanskrit, or that person has a sweet smile, or that person has long curly hair, or whatever. He really focuses on the essentials in those verses. So that's kind of qualities that we can look for. But we should also be careful not to look at the wrong things. Sometimes we might think that an advanced devotee is also really nice. in a kind of material way. And usually that person, I mean, will not be offensive or anything like that. But it doesn't necessarily, an advanced devotee is not necessarily kind of this like a teddy bear or something like that. There's plenty of examples of advanced devotees who have been quite difficult to understand for other people. Like if we think about people like Bamsidas Babaji or even the Goswamis were not always understood by their contemporaries. So yes, there are some qualities that we can expect in an advanced devotee, but we should be careful that we don't mistake kind of material things for spiritual things. Does that help?
Yes.
Anything else?
Haribol? I had never heard that the Goswamis were not understood by their contemporaries. I've only heard this part that they were popular with both the gentle and the ruffians and all this because they had no envy. And what's the story there?
Well, I'm sure there are many stories, but I thought about the story about, I think it was, and Maharha maybe can correct me if I'm mixing up here, but I think it was Sanatana Goswami. No, I think it was Rupa Goswami. He was sitting and meditating, and one devotee wanted to see him, but this devotee was I'm sure you're not allowed to say this word nowadays, but in the book that I read, it said like this, that he was a cripple. So he had really hard time walking, and he was walking very strangely like this. So he came there in front of Rupa Goswami to pay his obeisances, and Rupa Goswami started laughing. And he bowed down to Rupa Goswami, but he went away as soon as he could because he felt really offended that everybody told me that this Rupa Goswami is such a saint, and he laughed at me. I mean, I know that I look kind of strange, but that's not really nice for a saint to laugh at somebody who's a poor, disabled person. So he went to Sanatana Goswami, Rupa's older brother, and he said that I went to see Rupa Goswami and I had such a bad experience. Oh, what happened? Well, he laughed at me just because I move in such a strange way. Sanatana Goswami said. Let's go and see him again, but this time let's go another way so he doesn't notice us coming. So they went another way. They went through the forest, and from a distance they were looking at Rupa Goswami's meditation. So Rupa Goswami was sitting there deep in meditation, and he was sitting there completely still, and then he started laughing like crazy. Like that. And this disabled person, he realized, wow, he wasn't laughing at me. He was just laughing at something else, because now he doesn't even know that I'm nearby. So after a while, they went up to Rupa Goswami, and Sanatana Goswami said that Haribol, my brother, let me introduce you to this devotee. And Rupa Goswami, oh, Dandavat, nice to see you. Sound nice that you would come. And he clearly didn't even know that he had been there before. He hadn't been aware of him before. So Sanatana Goswami said, Rupa, you were laughing at something. What were you laughing at so crazily? And Rupa Goswami looked at him and said, it wasn't anything. Come on, tell us. This is a very nice devotee. Tell us what it was. And then he told that he was meditating on Krishna's pastimes, and Krishna and the cowherd boys, they were playing and they were doing different kind of pranks, and he was just laughing at the craziness of it all. So sometimes they also behaved in ways that people didn't immediately understand, like this disabled person in this story. And I'm sure there were other people who didn't have the wisdom to go and ask Sanatana Goswami or somebody else about what they were doing. So it's possible to misunderstand devotees. And I mean, devotees also do stupid things. We shouldn't be kind of blind against that reality. There are people who we might even think are advanced devotees, but their actions say something else. And then we just need to realize that maybe I was wrong. But sometimes it's also the opposite. Sometimes devotees do things that we first judge to be strange, but then when we get to know them better, we understand, maybe it wasn't like that after all. So it's always better to suspend judgment for a while, not to be too critical when it comes to devotees, but also to kind of, I guess this is a paradox, that at the same time also retain some kind of basic common sense, not to let us be fooled into like, yeah, he just beat up that person, but he's a really advanced devotee, so he must have meant something good with it. It's not like that. Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Bhrigupada. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something? Did Shamananda, did you want to say something else? Somebody said something. Okay.
Just to thank Bhrigupada for the answer. Not...
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Bhrigupada?
Yes.
Hear me. You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, so you mentioned, and I was just trying to clarify this, that reading aloud is better than reading quietly, like you can get more out of it when you read aloud. Is that what you're saying earlier?
Yes, I mean, in the sense, it's not magical, but in the sense that when you read aloud, you're usually forced to read more slowly. If you're a quick reader, and I don't know about you, but I am one myself. So if you're a quick reader, you often read too quickly, especially when it comes to philosophical or more difficult texts. I might read so quickly that I miss some things. So then it's better to kind of slow down, and you don't need to read like literally aloud. But because Srimati Radharani was their object of devotion, you can just kind of form the words in your mind. And then even by that, you when you need to form every single word, you'll pay more attention. Maybe you've seen on Facebook, there's these things where you have like short words, like a passage of short words, and they've scrambled all the letters so that only the first and the last letters are right, and everything else is just nonsense. And in the beginning, you can't make it out, but when you read 2 lines, then you can read the rest quite easily because your mind kind of solved the puzzle. So that just shows that we humans, when we reach a certain level of literacy, we don't need to read every single letter. We can just kind of skip and still get the main gist. But when reading spiritual topics, getting the main gist isn't always enough. You need to also kind of really go into the rasa, go into the juice of the text. And for that, it helps to read slowly, whether you read aloud or not. And of course, reading aloud can have kind of the magical side to it also, that you can really kind of feel how the text becomes embodied in you. Like what the Bhagavad Gita sounds like when you read it in the original Sanskrit, or what the Bengali of the Chaitanya Bhagavat sounds like, or so forth. So there is that kind of magic in it as well. And of course, these texts are full of Krishna's names as well. So when we say Krishna's name, that will also have a special effect if we say it aloud. Anything else? Okay, then it's time to end for this time, this third part. And next week will then be the last part of this series. I'm also going to be on Namarasa's podcast tomorrow, if anybody is interested, speaking about the Hari Bhakti Vilasa. So that would be fun for me, at least. I don't know how much fun it would be to listen to it, but it would be fun to speak about it at least. And of course, we have all the different Tattva Viveka lectures going on throughout the week. So I hope to see all of you on those, and then on the last part next week. Thank you, everybody, so much. Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandhara Vikritari Shri Shri Radha Madan Mohan Radha Govinda Radha Gopinatha Radha Damada Radha Shama Sundar Radha Damada Radha Gokulananda Radha Madhava Doja Gopal Nitai Gaur Shri Sharbhuj Giriraj Ki Jai. Jai Vishnu Parvanam Sampradvajacharya Stotra Sata Shri Shrimad Bhakti Vedanta Tripurari Dev Goswami Maharaj Gurudev Ki Jai. Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Bhai Charana Aravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Bhakti Rakshak Shri Dev Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Gaur Kishordas Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Sachidananda Moy Thakur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Jai Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Shri Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Gauri Vedanta Acharya Shri Bharati Bhushan Prabhu Ki Jai. Jai Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Srinivasa Ramananda Narottam Prabhu Trai Ki Jai. Jai Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Vyasavata Shri Vrindavan Das Thakur Mahasaya Ki Jai. Jai Shri Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunatha Shri Jiva Gopala Bhattara Suganath Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Jai Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Jai Prem Sakosha Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktarini Ki Jai. Jai Shri Antardvip Mayapur Simantardvip Madhyadeep Poladvip Ritudvip Chandudvip Madhyadvip Modra Madhvip Kodra Madhvip Rudadvipatmaka Shri Navadvip Dam Ki Jai. Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopa Goku Varadana Dvadashvanatmaka Shri Vrindavan Dam Ki Jai. Dvadashupamam Ki Jai. Shamakunda Radhakunda Ganga Yamana Tulsi Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Jai Shri Purushottam Dam Ki Jai. Sri Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Sudarshana Ki Jai. Jai Bhakti Vigna Vinashana Karashini Shingadev Bhagavan Ki Jai. Bhakta Paravara Prahlad Maharaj Ki Jai. Char Vaishnava Sampradaya Ki Jai. Jai Vaishnava Acharya Ki Jai. Char Dham Ki Jai. Char Veda Ki Jai. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Maharshi Patanjali Ki Jai. Akara Mataraj Shri Chaitanya Mat Ki Jai. Tadya Shakamata Sumha Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Sangha Ki Jai. Ananda Guru Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Bhavan Mangal Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Samagata Gaur Bhaktarinda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol.
Bhrigupada Prabhu Ki Jai.
Jai. Jai.
Hari Bol.
Very
Hari
well.
Bol.